Right.
And we're live.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you may be joining us from today. My name is Ben Kahn, and I'm a reporter with Broadband Breakfast. And on today's episode of Broadband.money's Ask Me Anything, we have with us today Gary Bolton, who is the president and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association, a position he's held since 2020. Gary had previously was at Adtran, where he spent more than a decade. And on behalf of Broadband Breakfast and Broadband Money, I just wanted to say thank you, Gary, for joining us today.
Ben, Drew, hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Gary. For the benefit of some of our audience who may not be familiar with the work that you've done, I was wondering if you could kind of go into some of your own background before we get into the nitty gritty of policy and all of that, and grants and whatnot, and fiber and all that great stuff. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about your time at Catena Networks, going back a long ways, and just kind of go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was an engineer by training, so try to keep that in the down low so anybody doesn't think I still do that. But I spent my career. I started, kind of co-oping out of college into a company called Northern Telecom, Nortel, and that was kind of the big deal back in. That we're moving from analog switching to digital switching, if you can imagine that, and the whole public switching telephone network. We had this twisted pair, and everybody had telephones and 5 nines reliability and all that great stuff. And so in the 90s, this is before your time, Ben. So if you can think, when your parents or whoever, but in the 90s, kind of the mid 90s, right when the internet started taking off. We created a company called Catena Networks, and it was Silicon Valley, Sand Hill Road investors, and R&D was up in Ottawa. And it was a bunch of my friends from Nortel, and it was basically a couple different R&D groups. So it was there we had the kind of silicon guys, and we had some access guys and some design guys, and so we basically started a little company where we actually took voice and DSL and combined it into a piece of silicon, and we called a modec, the voice codec and the DSL modem. So prior to this, so it's hard to believe, but I can remember when we were talking about 300 baud. When I remember, we would send a message at 300 baud, not kilobaud, 300 baud, where you actually could watch a character being formed. And so back in those days, we were at 56K modems, those analog beep, 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 kind of stuff that over your phone line. And then when DSL started taking off, and that was what we wanted to be able to do, is everybody was connected. The whole world was connected with a telephone line. And so we were going to be able to put over that telephone line a DSL signal so that every phone line, anybody had a phone, could now be able to have internet access. And it was brilliant. And so I remember our investors gave us $5 million, and it was about 6 or 7 of us by that time. And so the first board meeting, our investors go, tell me why you're excited about Catena. And I said, well, that we have an amazing team. I knew those guys, and I knew this was a very difficult thing to put this all in a piece of silicon, but we have the guys that know how to do it. We can make this technically work. And he goes, okay, well, what gives you pause? I'm like, well, because no one can buy it, right? And they're like, well, what do you mean no one can buy it? I said, well, voice is a heavily regulated industry, but at the time, when you had a data affiliate, it had to be arm's length, so data was unregulated. So if you put voice and data into a single device, then the regulated guys couldn't use it, and the unregulated guys couldn't use it. And so I remember they're like, their jaw dropped, and I'm sure and they're thinking, well, how do I get our $5 million back? And they're like, what are you going to do about this? And I said, well, I'll go to the FCC and we will change the regulations so that we can be able to deploy this product. And you can imagine, the investors thinking, great, this little tiny startup's going to go and change the regulatory environment. That's probably, they're probably starting to write us off at that time. But we did, and we were very successful at the FCC. We were able to get our proposal adopted in its entirety. And we were able to, basically that was kind of the big boom. And we went to $100 million of revenue almost overnight, and were acquired by Ciena for about $500 million in 2004, which was probably the largest exit at that time. So it was kind of a really fun time. And, just great kind of being at the beginning of, this whole internet boom and so forth.
That's super interesting. It always kind of makes me laugh because whenever I go to these conventions, I feel like I'm always the youngest person in the room. And so people are always explaining, oh, well, this is in the 90s. This is before your time. And I'm always kind of laughing because it's just so funny because I grew up in a world where all of these things were ubiquitous. I have a few memories of dial-up, just kind of at the back of my brain, but even my folks are really early adopters. So it's just funny to hear, talk to the people who champion these things. What can you tell me about some of the lessons that you learned from going from, this tiny little startup, doing something that was, groundbreaking and revolutionizing the industry, and like you said, going to $100 million almost overnight? And what would you take away from that situation?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty exciting, but I mean, I think the one lesson to everybody is that your voice can be heard, and people, when I was a CMO. People are like, why is the marketing guy spending time in Washington and at the FCC and on the Hill and so forth? And it really, is really powerful when you're able to change legislation or influence regulation. You can really unlock huge capital infusions. And, we're seeing that right now with the recent infrastructure bill and, or act now. And, the ability now to just flood the market with literally tens of billions of dollars to be able to get everybody connected. And so it's, I think even small companies, you see these big telephone companies and cable companies that have billions of dollars investing in their lobbyists and policy teams and coming in and pounding, the FCC and on the Hill. But, having a good story and, doing the right thing and being able to articulate that message to the FCC, NTIA, or the Hill, you can get a lot of traction. And they love hearing from small companies and small, so having a good idea, trying to do the right thing and being consistent on your message, you can make, really make things happen that you would have normally thought would only happen for those companies with these giant staffs that are just, having spending all this money on advocacy, big PACs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Speaking of a good story, advancing a little bit in time, after your time at Katina, you went and spent, I think I read 12 years at Adtran. Can you tell me a little bit about your time there?
Yeah, I mean, I was at Ciena for a while, and
Okay.
because I had to fulfill my obligation there, and a great set of guys. And then we did another startup. I was part of something called Hatteras Networks, which was on the Ethernet side. And then that was, we had kept winning at Hatteras, right? We had no revenue when I came in. It was, kind of on the third or fourth start of that startup, and it had no revenue because, again, the regulatory environment had changed. The CLECs had kind of died, and so kind of the market had changed for that product. And so, the investors had said, hey, come in and in 18 months, can you get us to revenue? And so we were able to, we got to about $25 million in revenue, and we were, one Bell South. That was the big, whale at the time. And so we win, and we're expected, going to be ready for a big IPO or be able to get acquired. But almost shortly after that win, Bell South got acquired by SBC had acquired AT&T, then took their name and then acquired Bell South. And so then everybody at Bell South was trying to figure out for a year if they have a job or not. And so that didn't go anywhere. And so, that took a lot of time, and when you're in a startup, time is your enemy. And so then we won BT, which we won the entire health network for the UK for doing this Ethernet product. Again, great win. We had a good partner there. We had, the companies we're working with were Alcatel, which is now Nokia, and ADVA. and thinking, okay, we'll have a great exit. And that's when the whole housing bubble, the subprime mortgages and all that blew up in 2008. So the whole capital markets collapsed, and all these companies that would acquire us were trading at 10 cents on the dollar. And so at that time it was kind of like, we're cash flow positive, we can kind of limp along, but it seemed like a really good time to exit, just because it didn't look like it was going to be a while for the whole market to kind of recover,
Right.
capital markets recover. And so I went to kind of a safe haven, went to a public company, and I was there longer than I expected. It's kind of like, I'll be there 5 years and I'll get back into startups again once the markets recover. But I did have some great opportunities, working at a public company, because I still teach at the university. So I was able to, teach at night, and I really got into that. I got to be really involved in a number of nonprofits, and I was chair of the chamber, which was great because that community, we were doing about 150 million of economic development a year. And then when I became chair, just timing wise, we went to about 2 billion, and the community's been getting about 2 billion a year in economic development. And not coincidentally, it's about when Huntsville Utilities and Google Fiber launched fiber across the city, because that really that changes everything for a community, is being able to get, fiber out. And it really can take you, it's kind of like putting economic development on steroids for, jobs and opportunities. And plus, Huntsville's tired of losing people to Chattanooga, which is up the road. I love Chattanooga, but didn't want, our best and brightest to go to the gigabit city. So anyway, yeah, so I did spend more than I had planned at a public company, but it was I was able to do some really fun things there.
Mm-hmm. And how did you find yourself then at Fiber Broadband Association, where you are now?
Yeah, so I had been on the board for about 6 years, and it's a great association. I'm a big believer in digital equity and trying to really solve a big problem, even from back in the Cantina days in the 90s, of trying to get everybody connected with broadband. And it seems crazy that, it's taken us over 20 years and we still don't have it done.
Mm-hmm.
So one is, I was real passionate about the Fiber Broadband Association, and I was going to be the incoming chairman for 2021. And so we're at the end of 2020. I think it was, in the pandemic, and the association, everything at that time, all the big money maker, what was really funding the association was the conference, and the conference had been canceled due to COVID. And so, there was some challenges there as far as, just the fact that, we were going to the reserves, and then the CEO decided to leave. And so I got a call from the chairman, Katie Espeth, and she says, well, the current CEO is going to give you a call in a couple minutes and tell you she's resigning. Why don't you take this job? And, I'd been very, very vocal about what the association needed, and I had this vision of where we needed to go. And I'm kind of thinking, Katie's telling me to, kind of put up or shut up. And so I decided that, talk to my wife, make sure that we could afford to, take this plunge. And it's just something I'm very passionate about. And so I was very fortunate to have, the board, unanimously come and encourage me to take the role. And, I took it in November of 2020. What year is this? 2020. So that's about 15 months ago or so. Mm-hmm. So it's been great. It's been a fantastic ride. And every day is the greatest day of my life. It's fantastic to have a job that you can't wait to get up. And everybody that we get to help all day long is so grateful. And the communities that we're able to get broadband out, to be able to, if you think about everything that's wrong in society, you can kind of bring it down to the digital equity. If you think about who's in prison, who, all the issues that we have, it can kind of, even think about pollution and congestion on roads and things like that. If we were able to get everybody connected with robust broadband, all those things kind of go away, because we are addressing the root cause and not all the symptoms. And it's just an amazing opportunity to be in the position I'm in to, be able to do things I love, things that I've been successful in the past doing, and bring it all together to try to, address those people that aren't connected today.
Yeah, I know everything you just said really resonates with a lot of the people who are part of the Broadband Money community. A lot of these people come from areas that, maybe don't have access to broadband, or at least insufficient broadband. And a lot of them are stepping up to the plate, and they're passionate about it because they've seen what the impact is of not having it. And speaking about the people who are part of the Broadband Money community, just want to remind you all that you can use this time to make sure you're putting those questions in the chat so I can ask Gary and we can get that rolling. I also want to take this as an opportunity to ask one of these questions. Before we get even more into the nitty gritty, I just wanted to ask a question that was put forward by Jace from Broadband Money, who, we're talking about your time where you started at Katina, then you're at Sienna doing startups, then you're in AdTran, now you're at the Fiber Broadband Association. At what point did you fall off a waterfall in this long string of events in your career? Where was the waterfall involved?
Yeah. So people that know me well, I spend a lot of time racing mountain bikes and kiteboarding, and I'm a huge whitewater kayaker.
Wow.
And so a few years ago, I had a pretty severe mountain bike crash and pretty much broke everything on the right side of my body, and never missed a day of work in all my career. So just for whatever that's worth. I don't know. My dad's 80, going to be 87 this year, and they still work 7 days a week. So I have some kind of weird gene where we just like to work. But anyway, so that kind of, I had also had compression fractures to my vertebrae in T4, T8. So I recovered from that, back out, mountain bike racing and everything. And I guess a few weeks ago, we got a ton of rain, just a massive amount of rain. My buddies and I headed up to the plateau in Tennessee, and we're going down. We had a great day, and then the next day we were launching off this thing's called Potter's Falls that you have to drop into Crooked Creek. And so I was first off, and when I landed, I did it perfect. I mean, believe me, Ben, I nailed this. And somehow when I landed, all the force gave me a compression fracture to T12. And so that of course, you don't want to tell your friends that you're severely hurt. So I kind of limped over to the side and said, you guys keep going, and I'm going to head back to the cabin. And so I got back there and called my wife and said, of course, she's an avid horseback rider, and she was all ready to go ride her horse, and said, you mind driving 3.5 hours out to this cabin in the middle of nowhere to pick me up? And unfortunately, she's had to do that a few times. So she was, not that I haven't had to do that for her, but anyway, so I'm on the mend. So a couple more, I'm hoping, 3 or 4 more weeks, I'll be back in the kayak and out in the mountain bike again.
Great. So now this is where really want to, press you a little bit. People, one of the big criticisms that you see from a lot of the wireless folks is, I've heard this 1,000 times, which is no one needs a gig. And it's like a mantra, that's repeated a lot. And I'm wondering not only how you would respond to that, but, why do we need a gig, or what kind of technologies are enabled by gigabit connections and enabled by fiber? If you could expound on that a little bit.
Well, it's not so much wireless, but it's also cable guys. And it's basically anybody that can't deliver is the ones who say that. And it's unfortunate because, I did listen to Chase and VentSurf, who, the godfather there of the internet. And, Vent he said, I think Chase asked him what's the definition of broadband to him, and he says, whatever speed I don't have today, that's the definition. Is what. And when I was at Nortel, I was responsible for a product called 1 meg modem, and at the time we were saying, DSL was at 6 megs, and we were saying, who needs 6 megs? If we can be able to because we could put a 1 meg chip into all our switching devices, so all the whole public telephones network, we could be able to just upgrade cards, line cards they called it, and be able to put a 1 meg on every device. And I went out I called it the 4 corner strategy. So US Robotics, Intel, and Dell, and I said, all right, if we were to go out and get this 1 meg modem, and we'll put it in all, you go from 56K modems to 1 meg, put it on all the computers, everything, and the whole world be solved, right? And so the DSL forum at the time, a guy named Tom Starr, said, well, no, we don't want that to happen. So we're going to create a new standard called, what was it called? G.Light. Mm-hmm. And so that and we got the whole industry. And so we scuttled Gary's plan to go do this 1 meg modem, that Nortel product, and we're going to do this G.Light. And I remember we spent like a whole year, the whole industry, working on this, thing that was going to be at basically a 1 megabit. And at the end of the day, a new company came in and says, I remember this seeing this at a big conference, says G.Light is dumb. And it was so true, because why would anybody settle for 1 megabit when you can have 6 megabits? Mm-hmm. Right? And it's a long story, but it's every time I've ever bet against bandwidth, I've always been wrong. And those of us that have been around a long time and seeing like storage, you think of, a gig was a lot on the storage, it's insatiable. And so, I mean, Ben, how much power do you have to your house? I mean, how many megawatts or kilowatts or whatever measurement? No one knows. No one cares.
Right. I couldn't tell you.
No one cares. And so it wasn't like in 1935, FDR said, well, we should only give rural communities, 10 kilowatts to their house, or maybe we should put a little, we'll come up with a windmill. If you're out really hard to connect, we're going to give you a windmill, or maybe you have a creek and we'll put a little paddle wheel, or we're going to do something crazy. Like today, we're just going to put a low Earth orbit satellite up in the sky. And, it is absolutely insane. And so what I can tell you is that today, we're shipping 10 gig symmetric. That's the number one PON solution that's being deployed today is 10 gig. And we're working on 50 gig, 25 gig is the next, and 50 gigs the next standard. And so we're going to be able to have so much bandwidth that's going to be, continuing to be deployed. And so we don't want to be able to discriminate based on your zip code. Look at your zip code and say, oh, gosh, that's a subsidized living area in urban America. We don't think that they need all that bandwidth. Or that's a very rural area. Who needs that? And the bottom line is, in order for us to solve these societal issues we have, we need to make sure that everybody has more bandwidth than they could possibly ever use. And it's crazy to come up with just to satisfy some solution, some legacy solution that some companies pushing. We really got to put that aside and think about. I like Chris Alley, who's going to be speaking at our conference. I'll plug his book here, since I got it right here. I don't know if you ever see this one, Farm Fresh Broadband. Yeah. I like Chris. He's at the University of Virginia, and he'll be a keynote at our conference in May, Nashville. But he likes to say that broadband is about people. And I love that saying, because, when you take people out of the equation, then it becomes about politics. And that is the problem we have, is anytime that someone makes a stupid statement, it's about, it's a political lever to try to, instead of doing what's right, to try to, take money, to advocate for money for whatever they're advocating for. And that's what they're paid for, right? I mean, these Lobbyists are paid, hired guns to do whatever someone else wants. But what we got to do, we have a once in a lifetime chance to do things the right way. I'll give you an example. Is this spring, every spring I teach the last semester business analytics class that's for master students as MSc 692. And last spring, one of my student teams was working with the mayor, and we have, even though we have a very prosperous community, we have certain zip codes that have been left behind, and they're in generational poverty. And so the mayor's like, what is happening in these zip codes where everybody else is prospering and these certain zip codes are being left behind? And so my students took the census data and they did a, basically triple regression analysis, and it popped out three things. Well, actually four things I guess three things that really matter. So if you pay more than 40% of your income on rent, so you can't make ends meet, you don't have access to higher education, and you don't have access to broadband and computers. And so what's the thing about those three things that you can solve that? If you got these urban areas that are subsidized living areas, broadband, and now everybody in those communities can now have access to jobs, they can have access to better education. And so then that will help them break those cycles of generational poverty. And so that's in urban areas. And, same thing applies for rural areas. I mean, it's crazy that, one application I didn't even know about was, with the depression of farmers, that, the internet, not only is it, you need it for being able to use IoT and, automate your farm and be able to know commodity pricing and all the stuff that farmers need, but even addressing depression, that you're isolated on a farm and being able to have broadband connectivity to be able to connect with others. And, so there's so many things that having robust broadband can really solve. And if you think about all the money, I was just at the state legislature last week, and, you think about all these line items on road infrastructure and stuff like that. Well, if we can have autonomous vehicles, the need for road infrastructure will start to dissipate, right? Because we'll be able to do so much, get rid of all the stoplights. We'll be able to have autonomous trucking, so get rid of traffic, be able to drive, prisons. We got overcrowded prisons. Well, one of the legislators said, for every dollar you spend on third graders, you'll save $7 on the prison system. And so if we can address these things by getting the right amount of broadband, which is all the broadband anybody can consume, then we will really be hitting the root cause and not be addressing the symptoms by funding prisons and funding more roadways and funding, all these other things that we're spending all our money on instead of just going after the right spot.
Well, I kind of want to shift gears here. I want to talk a little bit about IIJA, I'm blanking on the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, right? What a mouthful. But John Culbertson raised a point. He made a comment where he said there's no logic to shutting out wireless technology when speaking about fiber. And his point is essentially he doesn't want the perfect to become the enemy of the good. Now, how would we have this pot of money? It's a very large pot of money, but it's not infinite. So do you believe that, I given everything you've just said, I know you discussed about why it's important to get all of it, but what role do you think, if any, should wireless play in getting funding, or does it all need to be fiber? What do you think the balance is in this?
Well, so we're building, so first of all, the $65 billion is doing a lot of things, right? But the foundation is the BEAD program. And that is the $42.5 billion that's building the critical infrastructure. And so when you're building critical infrastructure, you cannot build a house on a weak foundation. And people have heard me say that. And so it's not about cable or wireless or LEO satellites and things like that. It is about building a robust foundation for generations to come. And so this week on Fiber for Breakfast, I'm having Ookla. Brian Darr from Ookla is going to be on there. And one of the things he told me is that 80% of wireless, your cell phone calls, are going over the fixed network. Right? And he said that, and I'm thinking, okay, I want to believe that, but that sounds like an awful high number. So I went and checked, Googled a bunch, and saw a number of different sources, and that's correct. That's a true number. That 80%, and I, of course, right? Because I've been working on Wi-Fi offload and things like that for years. So basically, when you're sitting in your house, in your office, your phone is offloading to Wi-Fi because you know when you're not, right? When you're driving down the road and you're like, oh, okay, I lost a call, or just when it doesn't work great, that's when it's not on a fixed network. And so we talk about why fiber is critical for 5G, because when you're trying to get within 300 to 500 meters of an antenna, you need to be able to have that front haul and back haul, and have that whole, you have low latency for all the autonomous vehicles and mission critical stuff. You need that immersive broadband. So all those things you need to have for 5G. But even on 4G and other things, is the first rule of wireless is to get it out of the air and into the ground at the first available point. Because, when you think about broadband, is pretty simple. It's really about noise, and it's about spectrum, hertz, and it's about how many bits per hertz. And so when you have a, you see the wireless have all these spectrum auctions, and trying to get C-band or whatever band, and millimeters or whatever, because they're trying to get little pieces of spectrum. Well, and I always think of a spectrum, it's probably before your time, but you used to have a dial on your radio, and it showed all the stations, right?
Those are antiques for me.
Okay. There you go. So when you're on fiber, you have all the spectrum you could possibly want. It's all there. You're not competing with anything over the airwaves. You're not competing and have interference. And so you have all the hertz. You also have, when you think about, noise, right? Noise is going to be your limiting factor on everything. And so when you have rain fade and foliage and all these things, or your EMI, electromagnetic interference on cables and things like that. So you have all these noise environments. Why on fiber, on optical pure piece of glass, you have zero noise. So you have all the hertz, you have zero the noise, and so then it allows you to be able to build these constellations of bits per hertz, right? So I always think of it like a juggler. If you're in a noise-free environment, no one's around you, you could juggle as many balls and a lot of balls. As soon as the room starts getting more crowded, right, you can't juggle too many. And so, that's why fiber is, the kind of the holy grail for critical infrastructure, is because it provides limitless capacity in this noise-free environment with all the hertz that there is. Plus, you got all these wavelengths that you can leverage. So that's why it just has limitless capacity. And so if you have that infrastructure, then what it's going to deliver is that awesome Wi-Fi or wireless experience, because now you have that critical infrastructure that you can get out of the air and into the ground. And all my devices are untethered, right? No one has a cord, but I need to have that Wi-Fi environment that gets out of the air and into the fixed network as soon as possible. And so it's really about building the right infrastructure, because we don't want tethers, we don't want wires, we want to be untethered, but we got to have that robust experience. And then we can leverage things like smart grid modernization and public safety and fiber optic sensing and all kinds of stuff.
So I guess the question isn't really should fiber play a role or should wireless play a role? It's a question of, how far back in the network are these technologies going to play a role? And my colleague, TJ York with Broadband Breakfast, he kind of raised a funny point where he says, do we really need fiber to the chicken coop? Where is that fiber? Where is the ideal situation, especially for Ashlyn, another colleague of mine with Broadband Breakfast, asks, how realistic is it to expect these small local rural governments to choose fiber and put the fiber in close proximity over other wireless technologies? That's one of the things that people are always saying is that, oh, sure, for high density, great, let's use fiber. But for low density, it's not cost effective. We'd be better off using wireless. How realistic is it to have that fiber in these, like, directly laid into these very sparsely populated areas?
It's criminal if you don't give fiber to rural areas. It is criminal because, it's FDR 85 years ago didn't say, as I said, he didn't say, oh, yeah, it's kind of hard to pull power to, if you're talking about, the North Pole, or, I don't know, Vint Cerf was talking about ice cubes in the North Pole and so forth, great, right? But when you're talking about any place in America, if you have power, then you should have fiber. There's no reason. I mean, there's poles, you can physically get a power cable to a house. And so if you're off the grid and you're got a, big solar or some kind of wind generation, yeah, then a LEO satellite or something, great. But for the, other than those 6 people that living off the grid, everybody else needs to have fiber because it really has to have the critical infrastructure. And just like we saw with, I had Chris McLean, the RUS administrator, on Fiber for Breakfast, and he was talking about RUS. He goes that basically electric co-ops have been, or excuse me, the telephone co-ops have been deploying fiber for decades now, right? And he said that even when the requirements for speed was 4.1, the telephone co-ops using RUS funds were deploying fiber to the home. And he said the reason is that RUS uses their money to build infrastructure. And where the FCC, when you looked at the Connect America Fund, they were basically handing out money on a promise for a level of service. And so when you have to promise to deliver 4.1 or 10.1 or 25.3, it's a race to the bottom, right? Because all you're trying to do is to, you take all that money, right? That's $6 billion, and you basically give just enough service to meet that 10.1 or 25.3.
Right.
And so then when I was worked for a vendor, a network vendor, it was great, right? Because we go sell them DSL, then we go sell them via DSL2, and then we go sell them a fiber to the curb, and we go sell. And so we're constantly selling the same, homes, the same ports over and over again as they move from up the chain. And, so if you want to keep, the manufacturers in business on selling the same things and refunding the same areas over and over again, which we saw with CAF, do that, say there's a minimum speed. But if we're trying to put the infrastructure, the future-proof infrastructure for generations to come, we got to build it right the first time. And so there's not a place that's too expensive to deploy fiber.
So this question just came in from Joan Engebretson. Some people have suggested that because it will take years to get fiber to everyone, we should fund some fixed wireless deployments with the intention that they would eventually be replaced by fiber. What is your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great strategy, right? Because the thing about fixed wireless, and I'm not against fixed wireless, because fixed wireless, it gets fiber as close to the subscriber as possible. So like, for instance, if I pull fiber to one side of the lake and I get fiber to the home, and I can beam fixed wireless across the lake and connect some homes while I'm bringing fiber around the lake, that's a way to get people connected. We see that with apartment buildings. You get fiber to apartment building and you can beam over to another one. And so you can pick up those subscribers while you're getting fiber to them. So that's a great interim strategy to be able to connect people. Now, I had John Green. I don't know if you know John. I love him. He's CEO of New Lisbon. They are WISP, and out in Indiana, rural Indiana, and put fixed wireless on grain elevators and so forth. And what he says is when he puts, beams down to the house, he is trying to get fiber to the home there as quick as possible because his call center is lit up. People are always complaining about their fixed wireless. So he can, as soon as he can get fiber to the home there, he can, because and then all of a sudden his phones go quiet, right? So he's trying, you can put it on top of the water tower or the grain elevator to be able to, hit a community, but get your, use that revenue stream to help build out your fiber to the home. So these are great interim strategies. Mm-hmm. What I am 100% against is giving Elon Musk $1 billion. And, to me, low Earth orbit satellites, see, all these other things are path to fiber, right? You're getting fiber closer and closer to the home, and you'll be able to leverage that. I had Chad Roop from Montana State Broadband Office the other day on Fiber Breakfast. And he, it's like fingernails on chalkboard. I love Chad, he's a great friend, but he was talking about Montana redlining the areas in Montana that are designated for Starlink. Mm-hmm. So RDOF, 640,000 locations were supposed to go to Starlink. Hopefully they'll never get that money. Go FCC, keep holding on that their long form. But so these 640,000 homes are sitting out there being relegated, someday supposed to get Starlink. And meanwhile, all this, ARPA money and the IIJA, the BEAD money, all this is coming down, and they're like, oh no, don't count those Starlink homes, don't give them fiber, because if that RDOF award ever comes out, they'll get served. And so not only if they ever do get Starlink, will they get stuck with a satellite, but they won't get the 5G benefits, they won't get the smart grid benefits, they won't get all the things that economic development, all the things that the societal benefits that fiber delivers.
We have about 15 minutes or so left, so I want to hit you with a couple nuts and bolts questions about IIJA. And this one comes from Elizabeth Moyer. She says, Gary, like you, we were disappointed that the IIJA did not use symmetrical speeds to define underserved. Do you see any other federal legislation on the table that requires symmetry? And if not, how far away do you think we are from seeing that?
Well, I don't know. And who was that put that question in?
That was Elizabeth Moyer, I believe.
All right, Elizabeth. Well, thanks for that question. And hopefully you saw our playbook that and that's been getting great reviews by the state broadband offices. So the state broadband offices have under no obligation to meet the minimum 100 by 20. And, on April 1st last year, the White House invited a bunch of us in to say that, President Biden's going to, make an announcement on his infrastructure plan. And at that time, it was 100 by 100 basically they said they wanted to do fiber, but the proxy for fiber was going to be 100 by 100. And Jonathan Adelstein, who was the Wireless Infrastructure Association guy at the time, stood up and said, whoa, you're going to, box out wireless from being able to participate in the infrastructure, which is, the conversation we just had is fiber is wireless, right? The more fiber you have, the better it is. And especially if you're the Infrastructure Association, you should, WIA, so Claude is the new guy there. Love Claude, great guy. And hopefully he's listening and say, they should be the #1 fiber advocates. And so, because it's about infrastructure, it's not the endpoint, it's infrastructure. And so we got to get all that fiber out there. So there was just a letter that went out from Congress. It went out from the communication committee. Did you see that one, Ben?
No, I'm not sure I did.
It basically went to Alan Davidson at NTIA, and it said, we need to prioritize fiber among other things. And so we were really happy to see, the Hill really pushing for fiber. Mm-hmm. And so again, what we've been talking to the offices, and what in the playbook, I put in a graph from Ookla. Again, mm-hmm. I'll have Brian Dar on to talk about this, but mm-hmm. It really shows that, well, I'll look it up real quick. It shows that when you're deploying today that the average American, I don't know if I have my chart here, but the average American is getting here it is. I don't know if you can see that. But the average American is getting, 211 megabits today. That was of December of 2021. And in the next 5 years, the average American is going to be getting, about a gigabit and about a half gig up. That's what, from the Ookla speed test. So that's what they're actually seeing. And so why would you ever build a network that will be obsolete by the time it goes in service? So 100 by 100 is not enough. 100 by 20 is not enough. We're deploying 10 gig. We'll be deploying 25, 50 gig coming down the road. So, if you're going to do critical infrastructure, every community should be able to have that infrastructure that can support. We're never going to be satisfied with how much bandwidth we have. We're going to want more and more and more, and all the amazing applications coming down the road.
Well, that's almost, this kind of leads into the next question, which is, that's just the case. Everybody wants more and more bandwidth, and now everybody's looking at fiber to kind of satisfy this need. I remember when I spoke to you at Fiber Connect last year, we talked about some of the issues that had been brought on by the pandemic, or at least had been exacerbated by the pandemic. And one of those was supply chain issues. And I'm wondering if you have any advice. Now we're, fingers crossed, we're at the tail end of the pandemic. Can't wait till I can stop saying that. But one of the questions that Sarah from our team raises is, she said, Gary, how can projects lock in supplies and costs as the world rushes to build fiber networks? I'd really love to hear your response on that.
Well, so the FCC gave me a call a few months ago, and they're like, we're hearing, 52-week lead times on fiber and these things, and we really want to understand, if there's a supply chain issue and what needs to be done about that. And so I went and I talked to our members, so we'd already looked at the fiber itself, and we last year we basically had 34% surplus in fiber capacity. Whereas we built 109 million miles of fiber in 2021, 109 million miles, and the demand was 72 million miles. So that means that 37 million miles that we exported to other countries. So seems like a lot of fiber. So why am I having a hard time getting fiber? So there's issues with resin. So fiber is the glass. It comes in a cable, so it has to, so there are components, and so you're only as good as the weakest link in your chain, right? And so you have to be able to get resin. And so what we saw is last year's announcement about $300 million from the fiber industry to put out more plants and to be able to address that. So we feel really good about that. And so what we did see is that there's not a supply issue, but a demand issue, in that everybody is putting in multiple orders, right? If you need, say 1,000 miles of fiber, and you put into this distributor, put that in, so you're putting in, your demand to everybody you can possibly put it in to see who the first is going to come up with. So instead of having, forecast of 1,000 miles, you put it 6 places, that's 6,000 miles. And so that becomes a problem, right? Is that, and then the people that have supplies are hoarding it, right? So you want to, build up and I go and look at these warehouses that have big spools of fiber, and it's like, well, we got to save it. So it's like toilet paper, right? You got to, hoard it. And so I went and talked to even our smallest members, and what's happening that's working, like for instance, I was down in Pharr, Texas, Pharr, which is at the very southern tip of Texas, halfway through Mexico. And they were the least connected city in the country. They were literally the least connected. And they used ARPA money, and their mayor, Hernandez, basically said, we're going to connect all our 22,000 homes with fiber, and we're going to do it in 1 year. And they now have all the fiber they need to be able to do that. So if a little tiny town in Pharr, Texas can be able to get the fiber, and so I asked them, how they can do that. And if, just to plug our latest magazine, Fiber Forward, we have a little article. I don't know if you can see about Pharr, Texas in there, but so read that. But anyway, so I asked, how is it that they happen to have fiber? And so basically, if you're working with a engineering consultant, they, as they're putting in your grant request or, doing your feasibility study and stuff like that, they know exactly how many miles of fiber you need. And if they put that order in, and be able to show the distributor that this is a real need, that you're not just one of 6 places you're putting in, this is a real need, this is a real forecast. And so you need to be able to put that in. So by the time that you go through all the other things in your process to the point where you're ready to make ready, put your fiber in, you'll have it. The other part is on chips, right? We all hear can't get a rental car and all those things. And so the good news is on fiber to the home, our chip geometries are going to very, very small geometries. And so that means you can get more yield on a die. And we don't have the same kind of, while we have a lot of regulation and safety testing and stuff on our chips and telecom, it's not like the car industry, right? It's, you don't have to worry about someone crashing into someone. So the chips are in the car industry, those are in larger geometries. And so they use an older process. We use the latest process. Cable uses the old process too. And so we're able to get better yields, and that looks great. And so I think a lot of that's going to abate. So I guess the short of this is we feel pretty good that in by this time next year, we'll be on normal cycles for supply in our industry. Barring any other thing happening, locust or whatever might happen.
Right, whatever comes next.
Whatever comes next, but we feel really good. But the rule of thumb is if you're a larger company and you have great forecasting capabilities, put in long range forecasts. You should be forecasting things out for several years. And if you're a smaller company, work with your consulting engineer and they will put in your forecast for you and make sure that when you're ready for it, that fiber will be there.
Great. We just have another 5 minutes or so, but I want to get a couple more questions in. This one comes from Justin Perkins, who his last day with Broadband Breakfast was yesterday, actually. But he's moving on to other things. But he raised the question, Gary, what are your thoughts about the Buy American provisions of the IIJA? If you could touch on that briefly.
Well, so Justin, that is a fantastic question. And, it's a tricky one, right? So we have, if I look at it just from a fiber cable manufacturing perspective, I think it's awesome, right? Because we have, as I mentioned, we have the domestic supply. At the Fiber Broadband Association, we have a committee that works on what we call trusted fiber. And so, as many of you know, the government, taxpayers are spending $2 billion to rip Huawei out of the network, right? So this Chinese equipment got in the network. We've got to get it out because it's critical infrastructure. You don't want bad actors in your critical infrastructure, right? We see with China, Russia now. I mean, and so having from domestic supply or from our U.S. allies to build your fiber, and you think, well, what's a piece of glass? Why? Who cares who built it? No, it really matters on the security perspective, on not only just making sure it's secure, but also to make sure that it's been ethically manufactured. And also from a pricing, you see a lot of price dumping from the Chinese and things like that. So just the distribution, the manufacturing, everything that's done ethical, and it's safe. Your communications are safe. So if I'm one of our fiber manufacturers, raw, made in America, great. If I'm the electronics guys, maybe not so excited about this. My last company, was manufacturing in the U.S. Everybody, had the American flag and all that. But chips come from all over, and so it's very, very difficult to take the big collection of parts and try to figure out that, get the right percentage to say it's American made, because all chips are made offshore for the most part. It's very difficult to try to figure out that. And so what I always saw when our US had these made in America clauses, the only people that said they comply were, the Taiwanese or the, Koreans or, anybody else who was definitely not building in America.
Mhm.
So basically, if you're willing to lie, then you could say, because there's not a whole lot of auditing on these things. So I guess it's a challenge, and we're just trying to figure out how to do this in a way that, we want American jobs, we want the products to be secure for the network, but we don't want to add cost and complexity. And in some of these, some areas, it is challenging to figure out what the right, does it have U.S. content? Is it really helping to do what Congress is intending? That's security and jobs and so forth.
Mhm. This last one I want to ask you. This was something that you'd addressed already in the chat that Drew had asked, but I'm wondering if you can just address it one more time for our audience now. Just wanted to get your thoughts on the middle mile component of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. How much thought should companies and states be giving to the middle mile segment of funds?
Well, so the middle mile is that's a tricky area, right? Because on one hand, what middle mile takes care of itself, right? If you're into an area that you have revenue that you're able to bring in, and then you can fund the middle mile. But unfortunately, if you look at tribal areas or very hard to reach areas, there's really, providers have either zero choices, like we saw in California in some areas, or they have one path. And then that path might be priced very, very expensively. And so, we only have, think about, with $65 billion, $1 billion is for middle mile. So it doesn't seem like very much.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, that's an area that I'm hoping we can address by addressing the last mile and then using the revenue from the last mile to help fund out the middle mile. It's just really challenging. You can't really start the last mile if you have no path to get there. Mm-hmm. And so, we're going to be challenged on that middle mile. It's going to be a challenge.
I lied. I have one more question before I let you go. What can we expect to see at Fiber Connect 2022? What can we look forward to? If you can just give us a little teaser.
Oh man, Ben, last year was awesome, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was spectacular. It was a record crowd, and the content was so fantastic. And then just the energy, right? I mean, for months afterwards, I'd go to different events, and everybody would still be riding on the Fiber Connect high, just because, and I thought, when I first got there, right, you were there, and there was so much energy and excitement. It's like, it reminded me of the 90s when, the internet was just taking off, and there's all this excitement and energy. And I thought, okay, this must be a COVID bounce, right? Everybody's been home on their mask and on Zoom, and they're finally out. But I realized that it's much more than that. We're in a really, the pie is about to get really big. And, we're looking at, we're usually on about a $4 billion a year federal subsidies. And, we're going to see that going up to about, 20 billion this year and up to 30 billion next year. And I mean, there's just a ton of money. And so what we're seeing is everybody's locking arms and working together as an industry to really try to address this digital equity issue. And because you don't have to squabble, right? There's enough money to go around. We're really going to fund this. And so this year, it is going to be, it's hard to beat last year, but it's going to be twice as good. We're going to have, so I tried to cut it at 2,000 people last year. We saw the tickers come in, just because coming into the weeks, we didn't know, no one knew if they're going to have COVID and where they're going to go. And all of a sudden everybody's like, all right, all clear, we can go. And it just started ticking up like one of those commercials, right? And I'm like, we got up like 1950, we're like, cut it off. And we ended up with 2,136 people or something like that. So even when you cut off the spigot, another 100 or two, because, are like, call me up like, Gary, come on, let me in.
Right.
So you slipping in. So this year we're going to move the cutoff to 2,500.
Wow.
And we've already got over 200 speakers. Last year we had 150. We have 200 speakers. We've added more tracks. We're getting tribal. We're having the keynote speakers are going to be fantastic. Even from our panels, we're having the key guys from NTIA there. We're going to have the president of CostQuest on the mapping. So all the key people are going to be there on these panels. And, just the content is fantastic. And, just we've already sold out on our exhibits a long time ago. We have a big list of people trying to get in. And, we just want to make sure that, and the other thing is we're co-located with the APPA, the American Public Power Association. They're going to have their conference and they want to come over and see your exhibits and the utilities. So it's going to be absolutely amazing. And I didn't mention this, Ben, I know we're wrapping up here, but yesterday I was in Baton Rouge for our first road show. We're doing the Regional Fiber Connects, and that was a record and was fantastic. And we're doing our next one in Providence on April 19th. So anyway, it's just it's an exciting industry right now.
Yeah. I want to take this last opportunity just to, say on behalf of Broadband Breakfast and Broadband Money, really appreciate you joining us today, Gary, and thank you to our audience for also participating. Just want to remind our audience that on April 8th, we will be having the next episode of Ask Me Anything and you plugged his book already, Gary, but Christopher Ali will be joining us for that, and we're really looking forward to that as well. But on that note, I just want to say thank you again, Gary. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Well, you'll love Chris. He's fun. Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Drew, and I appreciate it.